We are at a critical moment in our history. Many Canadians may not want to hear that. Instead, they want to tiptoe through the summer and just forget the enormous mental weight of the pandemic. But now is such an important time for all citizens to stand up and hold leadership accountable. Today, I'm going to walk you through what has taken place and what's on the horizon, and my opinion of what fuels these misguided decisions: self-centered leadership.
The failure of NPIs, leadership and the future.
The non-pharmaceutical interventions, or NPIs, that we have come to know as lockdowns have really failed to prepare us for the future and to guard our society against future crises. Not just health-related ones, NPIs including school closures and vaccine mandates, among dozens of other measures, have most profoundly impacted the working middle class, fundamentally handcuffed them from doing business, furthering their education, or gathering for weddings and funerals. Not only that, but a 2022 report from Johns Hopkins University concluded that lockdowns only improved overall mortality by 0.2%. The strength and esprit de corps of the middle class has been drained. And for what? A strong, vibrant middle class is the lifeblood of a healthy democracy. That is why, above all things, Canada is at a crossroads. A path where the middle class cannot succeed leads to nowhere good. One important way to look at where this country is, where it is going, and how it arrived here is to examine the track record of leadership. All levels of government and elected leaders have played a part in creating the country that we know today. I won't have enough time to go into detail on all the examples I'll present today, but this is a wonderful opportunity for you to do some digging on your own and to research these important topics.
Examining leadership, censorship and media bailouts.
Mainstream media bailouts have swelled globally in recent years, and Canada is no exception. In 2021, CBC alone received an additional $1.3 billion to assist in operational costs during the pandemic. Interestingly, CBC has reported a net loss for the last 8 consecutive years. It's difficult to get the exact numbers for what was promised versus what was paid out. In the spring of 2022, Cabinet invoked confidentiality and refused to detail actual cash payments. The newspaper executives who helped Cabinet design the terms of the bailout promised in the 2019 federal budget agreed to conceal payments. All the while, a newly released Reuters Institute and University of Oxford study reveals that trust in mainstream media has hit an all-time low of just 42% of Canadian respondents.
Digital passports and COVID tracing apps.
Ironically, the convenience of having COVID data on your friends and co-workers hasn't been all that well accepted by Canadians. The federal government spent $20 million on developing and marketing a COVID contact tracing app. Less than 22% of Canadians even bothered to download it. And of the 3.9 million people who have tested positive for COVID, less than 2% reported it to the app. Evidently, the feds overestimated how much Canadians wanted to be tracked and how much they wanted to track one another.
Freezing bank accounts.
Through the Emergencies Act and citing terrorist financing laws, the federal government froze bank accounts of individuals who had been directly and indirectly associated with the Freedom Convoy movement in the early months of 2022. In a February 17th press conference, Chrystia Freeland issued a chilling warning. The consequences are real and they will bite. As of yet, there has been zero evidence reported of foreign interference, foreign financial backing, nor has the finance minister been able to identify what specific economic threat the Freedom Convoy posed during those cold winter weeks on Parliament Hill. An inquiry into the invocation of the Emergencies Act was mandatory as per the Act itself, and the appointed 11-member committee has a year to reach its conclusions. Request our reference material for a timeline of the events and the testimony gathered from the inquiry hearings.
Manipulation of family values and ideology.
Mainly through the public education system, there has been a concerted effort to deconstruct the nuclear family and to discredit family values over the past few decades. In recent years, this looks like the presentation of gender ideology, critical race theory, and the erosion of parental rights in the schools. Post-secondary institutions have championed the diversity, equity, and inclusion mantra, and often sacrificing the quality and expertise of instructors. Canadian professor, author, and podcast host Gad Saad put it this way: the edifice of reason and dignity are being peeled from society. The protective layers and values that have made the West are being broken. The great societies that have been spawned in the West and slowly being eradicated by the idea pathogens which share one common thread to free their hosts from the shackles of reality. For the most part, Canadians want to be left alone by their government. We want equal opportunity to work hard and to find our own way. Overregulation and the politicization of every aspect of life is unnecessary and exhausting. It's time to tell self-serving leaders, enough is enough. So what kind of power grabs do we need to be mindful of for the future?
Looking at our future. Climate and the green agenda.
Many seem to be fixated on the climate as the next big catastrophe for which the government must intervene. I am all for individuals being more innovative and respectful of nature, but so-called climate lockdowns should be publicly condemned as an acceptable policy. Citizens and corporations are already experiencing massive regulations and taxes on emissions like the carbon tax. Greenwashing is the act of labeling and marketing a product or service as environmentally friendly under false pretenses. Well-meaning customers are easily drawn to buying these items, often at a high price point. Greenwashing has become a very profitable strategy all on its own.
Digital currency.
Digital currency also presents a potential issue. Canada has been developing the framework for a central bank digital currency since January 2020. Tom Mutton, a director for the Bank of England, explained it this way: you could introduce programmability. What happens if one of the participants in a transaction puts a restriction on the future use of the money? There could be some socially beneficial outcomes from that, preventing activity which is seen to be socially harmful in some way. But at the same time, it could be a restriction on people's freedoms. In other words, there is a version of the future where the state could have total control of how and where you spend your money.
The Pandemic Treaty.
In 2021, dozens of countries supported the World Health Organization's Pandemic Treaty, which is essentially a legally binding document relinquishing powers of pandemic management to the WHO. Meanwhile, it is extremely troubling that the WHO has recently changed the definition of pandemic. American authors Stephen Groves and Brett Schaefer from the Heritage Foundation wrote that the WHO failed miserably to manage COVID. Although the international health regulations are legally binding, China faced no consequences for its lack of transparency and communication about COVID-19. Worse, the WHO wilted in its responsibility to be an honest broker and instead appeased China and let the rest of the world pay the price. I'd really encourage you to look into this for yourself. Remember, you can request our reference material by visiting returntoreason.tv.
Inflation and government spending.
Pandemic measures cost the government trillions. More money hemorrhaged out of the taxpayer coffers during COVID than was spent on both of the world wars combined. Even the Bank of Canada has openly stated that levers to slow inflation, like raising interest rates, needed to be used much quicker. Not to mention that Canada is still spending money to import oil and gas while handcuffing its homegrown industry out west.
Trends towards globalism.
There are aspects of globalism that can be good, such as working together to lift whole groups of people out of extreme poverty, or to advocate for justice in the face of human rights violations. But it is extremely misguided to think governance should be pushed higher up the elite ladder. A lot of globalism schemes come from a group called the World Economic Forum. Even skeptics agree it may have started out with great intentions upon its inception in the 1970s, but is now run amok with power-seeking elites testing out social credit systems on unsuspecting populations. Globalist elites seem to have conveniently forgotten that they themselves have no concept of the day-to-day reality of the people of the world. They are so unaware that to them, the ends justify the means. That's any means necessary to get more power and to stay in power. A weak leader works for his next career posting or his legacy. A great leader works and fights for the interests of his people.